Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next session. I'm glad you could be here with us today. I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Jeremy Compton from Upstream Academy. He's a director there and joined in 2018. After leading his own consulting practice and before that even, leading a large national accounting firm's big data analytics program and forensics practice. He's also the speaker that gave one of my favorite lectures on advanced ratios, and he's probably heard me say that many times, and a former ACFE Speaker of the Year. He's really passionate about people and find those to be the most important assets within an organization and developing the next generation of firm accounting leaders. He specializes in developing those future leaders through his Emerging Leaders Academy, facilitating partner retreats, and helping firms launch new services. He's a co-host of the podcast, The Upstream Leader. And outside of work, he enjoys spending time with his family. It's not in his bio, but I happen to know he coaches a lot of sports and has an epic zip line that I can't wait to be invited to go zip lining at his house with his 3 daughters. So with that, I'm absolutely glad to have Jeremy Compton here. I'll be launching some polling questions and putting in the chat when the polling questions are live. So please answer those along the way. So Jeremy, it's all you. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. I appreciate that. That advanced ratios course always comes back up. I appreciate that. That was a lot of fun. And I'm excited to be here with you all today. I've long been a fan of MindBridge and I'm really excited to get to speak at the user conference here. And we're really going to talk about how do you take all of the exciting things that are happening in technology and all the great solutions that MindBridge has to offer, and how do you drive change in your organization when it isn't necessarily required? And that's one of the hardest types of change that there is out there, is this concept of optional change. But really, when it comes to technology, especially cutting edge technology, often it is optional. And that's really what we're going to be talking about here today. And as Danielle said, I work with a number of accounting firms. I've worked with clients in all industries for a number of years and probably worked through change initiatives for well over 100 accounting firms and hundreds of organizations, a lot of those around technology, which is why we're here today. So why do we have an entire session on change? And one of the main reasons that we have this is because it is absolutely critical that you understand what some of the barriers are to change, what some of the requirements are for successful change in your organization. And especially when it comes to the technology side, we've really got to add in this component, not just change, but optional change, because it isn't a requirement that your organization adopt new technology. And that's a huge challenge for many of you that are going to be leading these initiatives to adopt technology and push technology forward in your organization, which means that you've now got to figure out how exactly do you get this optional change to really work. And for that, what I'd like to do over the course of the next 45 minutes or so is really talk through what are some of the key principles for change? What is it that you need to understand about change so that you can more effectively drive it forward within your organization? And when you think about all of the exciting advancements in technology, and I know that MindBridge has been pioneering those for a number of years now, it is sometimes difficult to get others in the organization up to speed and really get them excited about this new cutting edge technology or this new solution that's out there. And it's easy to get the pushback. And I can tell you from experience, it's easy sometimes to even want to push back on that change. So that's really what we want to talk about today, is what are some of the strategies, what are some barriers, and I'm going to end the session by really laying out a framework for you that is designed to help you be as successful as possible in leading positive change in your organization. And for that, let's go ahead and get started. I will add, if you have any questions that you would like me to answer, whether it's trying to strategically drive change or anything just specifically that I'm talking about over the course of the presentation, please send those in. I'll be watching the Q&A here, and we'll address those as we can throughout the course of the presentation. But with that, let's get started. Key principle number one that I really want to talk about, and again, as I said, I've got about 7 of these principles that I really want to walk through. Before you can actually drive change in your organization, especially this not required optional change that I keep referring to, you've got to have a culture that is willing to change. And it can be very challenging to create a culture that is willing to change, because a lot of people equate that with, we are going to be in a constant state of change initiatives. And it isn't actually the case. And it's really important to recognize that if we are willing to change, that doesn't mean that we have to be in a constant state of change initiatives. And the key phrase here that I really want to focus in on is change initiative. Every organization is constantly changing. Whether you want to admit it or not, we are constantly changing. Whether it's new people, we're hiring, we're firing, we're transitioning people, we're promoting people, we're putting people into new roles, we're creating roles for the people. The people side of your organization is in a constant state of change. As people develop new skills, they build on their strengths, they mitigate their weaknesses, the very landscape and the environment in which you operate and the people with which you operate, they begin to change. You also have customers that are changing on a very regular basis. So you'll have customers that are new, you'll have customers that are leaving, you may have new services, you may have new markets, you may have new locations, you may have new regulations that you've got to deal with. Perhaps you've changed some processes, now you have some new risks. What I always like to point out to people as we embark on this journey of change and how do we become successful at it is, you've got to look back and recognize you are always changing. Constantly in your organization, you are changing. Now, I mentioned in the description for this session that a recent, it was an MIT Sloan review survey found that one of the top contributors to the Great Resignation is this idea of a highly innovative culture. Look, I love innovation, and I believe that most organizations could probably handle being a little bit more innovative. The reason, in my observation, that people are leaving organizations due to this highly innovative culture, and the only reason that really shows up is because highly innovative organizations are constantly in a state of change initiatives. And again, it's really important that it's change initiatives, because those are exhausting people. Those are really wearing people out because it's optional. And the challenge that we face, or the thing that we're not as great at that we really could improve upon, is we don't do a great job of working people through change. We don't do a great job of communicating before the change, during the change, after the change, all around the change, and all throughout the change. And it feels like we're just in this constant state of another initiative, another initiative, another initiative. We're going to add this initiative in the middle of another one, and we don't even really know where we're at anymore. We are constantly changing. What I don't want you to do is be in a constant state of change initiatives. A lot of the changes that we face that I just described, people, customers, regulations, risks, all of that, a lot of that change is forced. And that's why it's really important that before we move on, there are two types of change that I need you to understand. There is forced change and there is voluntary or optional change. And in every organization, you're going to encounter these two types of change. Voluntary or optional change is where we struggle the most because we aren't given a choice when it comes to forced change, which is key principle number 2. I actually believe, and I've observed this, that many organizations, in fact, I could argue that most organizations are great at change, but it's got to be the forced change. That's what they're great at, is these forced changes to which they didn't really have a choice in the matter. Their hand was forced. And what are some examples of that? Because when we think about forced change, let's be real honest, that is being as reactive can get. There is nothing proactive about a forced change. Now, I work with a lot of accounting firms, and right before the pandemic, a number of firms had on their 5, 10, some of them 15 to never going to happen year plan of, we're going to figure out remote work. We are going to make the jump to a remote environment. I know many of your organizations that are outside the public accounting space probably had the same thing. It was on the horizon. We were kind of talking about it. We didn't really want to talk about it because we didn't think it could happen. But all of a sudden, In March of 2020, our hands were forced. We had to make that change. And this thing that had been living on these 5, 10, 15, 20-year plans, all of a sudden in 2 weeks, magically happened. And now everybody was working remote, and we were just remarkably great at that change. We figured it out. And a lot of organizations would say that they then had their most productive year in 2020, which is amazing, because the very reason that so many organizations didn't want to make that change is because they said they would lose productivity. The hand was forced. The change didn't have a choice to it. We couldn't talk ourselves out of it. You know, the other big reason that forced change is easier is because the pain of not changing is significantly greater than the pain of the change when it's forced. In forced change, it's typically a you will change or you will cease to exist type of mentality. You aren't given a choice when it comes to forced change. You've got to do that to perpetuate your organization, your business, your year. Everything hinges on the fact that you're able to react in that way. We're actually pretty good at that change. Here's the problem that I have with it, and why we can't live in those forced changes is the fact that when we live in the world of reactionary change, we only change when it's required. We become very myopic in our thinking. We are reacting to one in particular thing. Perhaps it was, and you know, the example that I just gave, it was the pandemic, right? We had to change. No choice, gotta have it. When we are constantly in reactionary change, we have very not only myopic thinking, but very short-term thinking. We look for Band-Aid fixes that put out the fire, right? It gets us to that next week or that next month or that next quarter where, okay, we dealt with the issue. The problem is we didn't actually deal with the issue. When we live in a state of constant reactionary change, we don't have time to even figure out what the issues are. We don't have time to figure out why we should actually change or what we should actually change. In times of forced change and reactionary change, we instantly go into brainstorming mode. How do we fix this very one thing? Again, very myopic in our thinking. What we need to do is we need to go into question storming mode. What are the actual issues that we need to address? What are the underlying problems, the underlying systems, the underlying processes that are broken that led to this challenge that we now have to somehow Band-Aid and short-term fix? That's where we want to get to, but we can't do that when we live in a state of constant reactionary change. Now, I'm not saying that this type of change is ineffective. In fact, many of our forced changes are remarkably effective. For those of you that are in accounting firms, tax regulations change every year. We make it happen, right? It's effective. We still get great products out the door. We still are compliant. We're getting everything done. It's just not as effective as it could be. Can we make incremental reactionary changes from now until the end of time? Sure, we can. It's not going to be as effective. We're not going to be as successful. It doesn't mean you won't be successful. It simply means you could be way more successful if you could figure out a way to stop reacting and start being a little bit more proactive. And that's really where this idea of voluntary change really comes into play. You see, voluntary change is significantly harder, but it's more effective at solving our underlying issues. It's much more effective at helping us figure out what is it exactly that's broken. That's where I want you to go. That's the type of change that as you think about the technology that's ahead of you, the innovations that were discussed in the keynotes this morning, the solutions that are out there that this technology that MindBridge has provides, the amazing things that it can help you do requires you to be very proactive and say, you know what? We recognize that maybe we have a solution right now and it can accomplish our goal. It can do this thing for us. It can help us get to the next quarter, get us to the next year, serve our clients in a very compliant way. That's great. But if we really want to make a difference, if we really want to be an advisor for our clients, if we really want to make a difference in our organization and help our organization grow and manage risks and make better decisions and be more data informed so that we can truly take our organization to the next level, that requires that you're willing to be much more voluntary in your change, that you're willing to say, I'm not looking for a short-term fix to this one issue. I want to understand what is the process that needs to be improved upon to help us get there. There's a really, really good book, and I know Danielle knows I'm an avid reader and I always have book recommendations. This is, I think, the only one that I'll give you. But in the book Upstream, not at all related to Upstream Academy, but a great title, I've just got to say. But in the book Upstream, the author Dan Heath really challenges people to start addressing this. And the example that he gives is, it's just a great example of, there's two people that are standing on the side of a stream, and all of a sudden, a child comes floating down the stream, and they jump in and they rescue the child, and they get back out, and they see another child coming down, and they jump in and they rescue the child, and they get back out, and they keep doing this to the point at which they're staying in the river. They're staying in the stream nonstop. And they're rescuing. And finally, one of the two gets out, and the other one asks, where are you going? I'm going upstream to figure out how the kids are getting in to start with, and I'm going to stop it upstream. You see, constantly rescuing is that idea of reactionary change. What we want to do is we want to go upstream and say, okay, what's leading to this ineffective outcome? What's leading to this problem? That requires that we step back and you actually take the time to focus on the future, to focus on, okay, what's happening, where we're at right now, where do we want to go, and what are the gaps between where we are and where we want to be? What is the service that we're providing now? What is the service that we wish we could provide? How can we utilize technology to get better in that? What is it that we need to address? That's what an upstream change really is. I'll be really honest with you. It takes a lot of extra time to change proactively. It's a lot harder to change proactively. There's a ton of uncertainty when it comes to changing proactively, because I can't necessarily measure success for you. I can't guarantee that a proactive change will create the outcome that you're looking for. It is really difficult to figure out, how do you guarantee success in proactive change? I just want to acknowledge that. And that is one of the things that makes those voluntary changes so difficult, because we don't exactly know. There's a ton of uncertainty. What if? Well, you know what we can do? So we can say, what if we do A? And we go down that path and we look and see what is that worst possible outcome. We can say, what if we go down B? And it takes us to the best possible outcome. And then we can come back to the reality to say, you know what? It's probably somewhere in between there. It's probably not going to be near as bad as it could be. It's probably not going to be near as great as it could be. But we can figure out what is required for all of that to be true. What is required for all of the best case scenario to be true. You see, one of the things that we've got to do is we have got to figure out this alternative reality, this alternate reality that might exist. Now, I work with a lot of accountants. We struggle with this. It's not just accountants, by the way. Lots of people struggle with this because it's so hard for us to really work through in our mind what could happen. What could the reality be? So what I want you to do, what I really want you thinking about is, if I'm going to make this change, what is the reality that I want to happen? Right? What reality am I trying to get to? What is the reality if I don't make a change that will happen? Again, I can't necessarily guarantee that I'll get to the ideal, but what I can do is I can use that in my measurement of what could it be. Now, for most of my career, while I was in public accounting, I focused primarily on fraud detection and prevention. And I've got to tell you, it's one of the best applications of technology, but it's also one of the hardest sells there is. I always had a lot of people asking me, well, Jeremy, how much fraud can you keep from happening? I don't know. I had some people that would ask, well, Jeremy, if this is how much fraud occurs every year, how much fraud is prevented every year? It's impossible to measure what didn't happen. I realize that. And for many of you, you're going to be using technology to mitigate a risk. It's impossible to quantify what you stop from happening. But we can forecast into the future. We can forecast what do we think would happen if we didn't apply this new solution? What would happen if we didn't change? What would happen? What could happen if we do? And that helps us get to that measurement. So for those of you that are the more the numbers folks, when it comes to the calculating the risk and making the business case, that's what I'd encourage you to do. Yeah, the numbers are maybe a bit made up. I get that. All forecasts in a way they're based in reality, they're based in fact, but it's a forecast. I want you to forecast out what would happen if you did change, what would happen if you didn't change. Do you get to a better place? What has to be true? I'm going to give you this framework here in a little bit. One of the best questions that you can ask in that is, what has to be true to get you from where you're going to be without change to where you want to be with the change? What must happen for that success to be realized? The alternate realities that we keep from happening are difficult to quantify. But that's where we've got to be a little bit, maybe creative is the best word for it. We've also got to be very realistic. Where are we headed? What are we going to keep from happening? What do we want to see happen? That's where we start to get upstream. That's where we start to go figure out what are these processes that need to change. That question, what has to be true for? That's where you start to understand the processes. Let me give you an example of an upstream change or an upstream challenge that many organizations worldwide are facing right now. Many are calling it a recruiting challenge. Recruiting is so difficult. We can't find people. We're struggling to find people. Recruiting is a reactionary. It's a forced change. I lost people. I got to recruit more. I lost people. I got to recruit more. I'm growing. I've got to recruit more. That is very reactionary. That is very forced. By losing people and or growing, we must get new people. I would argue recruiting is not our problem. Retention is our problem. If you can solve retention, why do people leave? Why do people stay? How do we get more people to stay? Recruiting takes care of itself. Because now you're not recruiting for those that you lose, you're recruiting for more that want to stay. There's less to recruit. That's an example, though, of that difference in the mindset of change. Is it reactionary, recruiting, or is it proactive? Fix retention, recruiting becomes easier. That's what we're looking for when we talk about these different types of changes and where you need to be headed. Let me give you key principle number 4. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to send those in. I'm happy to tackle those as we go. In order to drive optional change, you're going to have to be able to identify what are the barriers that exist to change and how do you address them. And I'm going to give you a strategy for addressing them in a little while. But one of the very first things that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to figure out what barrier or what barriers are you up against. And I want to talk through several different barriers and kind of what they look like, how they show up, and what you're going to need to do to be successful. One of the biggest barriers that we see, not necessarily one of the most difficult, but a very common barrier, is problem blindness. And in problem blindness, what happens is we don't see anything as a problem anymore because we've just accepted it. Going back to my previous example on recruiting versus retention. I know a lot of organizations, they look at their turnover rate and they say, you know what, that's in line with industry averages. That's not really a big deal. When we accept that reality as just the way that it is, we now lose sight of the fact that retention might actually be our problem. And in fact, as much as I'm a data guy, I love data, I love benchmarks, I love analytics, KPI, all the things, right? I am not a huge fan of the way most organizations use benchmarks, because many organizations will use benchmarks in a way that creates problem blindness. They'll strive for an industry benchmark, get there, and then say, you know what, that's just the way it is. We're in line with the industry. I've got to tell you, that is really, I'm going to be really blunt. You are striving for mediocrity if you are simply looking to be the industry benchmark, because the industry benchmark in most situations is average at best. It's what everybody else does. If you want to be great, you've got to be better than the industry benchmark. So when you use those benchmarks, be very cautious if you are creating problem blindness. Which if you hear anybody saying, well, that's just the way it is, you might be masking what otherwise is a huge problem in your organization. Anytime you hear that, I would encourage you, ask, why does that have to be the way that it is? Is there something that we could do better? Not is everybody else in the industry doing better? What could we do better? Because your change initiatives are about you. They're about your organization. They're not about everybody else's organization. So you need to figure out, where is it that you're accepting things the way that they are rather than pushing on, could it be better? Yes, that's the way they are. And in many cases, it could probably be better as well. Second thing, a perceived lack of time. I put the word perceived in here for a reason. Many leaders will say, we don't have time to address the issue. We don't have time to make this large sweeping change. But you know what? We've got time for 100 little bitty changes. We don't look at the accumulation of those little changes, the time that it takes for those. We don't look at that accumulation. We look at, well, it's going to take X number of days of effort for this one big change initiative, but maybe it just takes an hour or two for this change, and then this change and this change. And we lose the fact that we might spend weeks of effort in little band-aid, short-term fixes, short-term changes that are addressing the surface level problem, not the actual issue. And as a result, we end up spending more time throwing band-aids on the problem than we do really just investing in and solving the underlying issue. In nearly every situation, if you look at what it is that you're trying to change, why you're trying to change, if the pushback is, we don't have time for this, I'd ask that you look and see, how much time are you taking on each of your short-term fixes? Extrapolate that out. Figure out, okay, well, if we do that for the next 6 to 12 months, how much time are we really going to spend? And then figure out, is it worth it? Make that determination. Is it worth it to spend 3 times the amount of time over the next year making Band-Aid fixes, rather than simply saying, we're going to invest a couple days now because we know in the long run, way better. It's going to be a more effective change, and it's actually going to take less time in the end. Not a lot of people want to go that route. The short-term fixes are often easier, less painful. You can get people on board because there's less of a time investment. I'm asking you, can you do better? Can you look at what is the total time investment of short-term fixes and compare that to the investment for the actual process solution? Another one that you need to know, and this is especially, this is true for everybody, but it's a couple different perspectives. The more experienced you are in your career, the more often you're challenged to overcome this internally. The younger you are in your career, less experienced you are in your career, the more often you have to help other people overcome this. And this barrier is the fact that for many people, they anchor their identities on decisions that they have made, on opinions about the way things are, the way things should be. The reason that I said, if the more experienced you are in your career, it may be you having to overcome this internally, is the longer that we have held on to the same opinions, the same decisions, and we have defended it as the right thing based on opinion, the more we start to anchor an identity to a decision. The more that we start to anchor our identity to our opinions. When we come back and we start to anchor our identities to our values, change becomes easier. For those of you that are going to have to be the one to change, I would ask that you look and see, are you anchoring your identity on something that you built, something that you created, a process that you put in place that was accurate and correct, and maybe it's still great today, but it could be better? Are you anchoring it on that decision, or are you anchoring it on your values, which is, I want the most effective process, the most efficient process. I don't have to be right. I want the best. That becomes a very difficult thing. That requires an internal reflection to figure out. Where exactly is my identity. For those of you that are coming into an organization, you're new in the organization, you have less experience in that organization, be cautious when you pitch new ideas. Be cautious when you attack the way that things have always been. I'm going to give you a very intentional strategy on this. Just understand that there is a high likelihood that the person you're talking to might be the one that built it the way that it is. And when you attack that, you run the risk of attacking their identity. And when you attack their identity, changes become remarkably challenging to push through. Another big barrier is a high volume of change initiatives or reactionary changes as well. All of that can cause change fatigue. Yes, we are always changing. The more well thought out and well managed change we have, the more methodical that we are, the more successful we're going to be. Understand that your people will be worn out by change, whether it's reactionary or it's proactive. You've got to navigate it. You've got to manage that change. Constant reactionary change can be exhausting. Constant change initiatives can be exhausting. Well-planned, well laid out changes that don't create emergencies, crises, or unnecessary deadlines, I should say. That's going to be where you get the most success. That's where you're going to get the most traction in your change initiatives. Just be wary of this, especially now in 2022, people are change fatigued. Again, I believe that's why in that MIT Sloan review, that study, that highly innovative companies were part of, their cultures were one of the big contributors to turnovers, because people are exhausted from the change. We've got to be intentional in how we roll this out. For some, when it comes to making a change, they're afraid they're going to get it wrong. And they have this fear that if I'm the one that instigates the change and it's wrong, everything's going to come crashing down. We often see that in cultures where mistakes aren't allowed and perfection is valued over progress. The result, we get this decision paralysis where we just don't do anything. And that's a very unhealthy place. If you see that people, you know that they're ready to change, you know they want to change, but they have a fear that it'll go wrong, or it'll have a mistake, or it'll have an error. Really take a look at your culture. Do you value growth through mistakes and learning through experimentation, or are you putting more of a pressure on perfection than progress? That can lead to significant challenges. When you're making a change again, perfection again, looking for that perfect solution. So this isn't necessarily somebody that is afraid to make a mistake, but this failure to launch, or this, I'm not going to launch it until it is absolutely perfect. You're going to spiral down the rabbit hole of what ifs. And it's easy to do, especially when you're a high achiever and you want it to go well. Instead of, I'm not going to make a decision, it's, I'm going to just scenario all the decisions to death, and I'm never going to have one because I can't find the perfect one. Both of these show up in organizations. Both of these, I want you to be very wary of. I want you to be cautious of. Not my problem thinking. This is often at the leadership level. So for those of you that are at the leadership level of your organization or working with the leadership level, when people take this mindset of it's not my problem, they're going to be supported to change, but not committed. For you to have successful change, you need your team, you need your leadership to be committed to the change, not just supportive. Committed means they're all in the meeting, and then they're doing what it takes after the meeting to make sure that it happens. Supportive means that they're nodding their head in the meeting and say, yep, let's do this. They get out of the meeting and they go on about their merry way, and they're not going to do anything extra to help that change be successful. You need to help people see why it is their problem, why they should be invested in the solution, why they should commit to the change, and how it's going to benefit them and the organization overall. Help make it their problem, or at least a problem that matters to them. Connect with them personally. That's going to help you be much more successful in this regard. Got to mention this one. Otherwise, we'd be remiss. Otherwise, success is a huge barrier to change. If it's working, why would we change it? Why would we change if it's not broken? And I recently heard somebody say, if it's not broken, break it. I love that idea. If it's not broken, break it. Figure out, how do we make it better? Success will keep people from changing. That's why some of the biggest changes you see organizations make is when their life is on the line. If they don't make it, they will fail as an entity. They will go out of business. They'll go bankrupt, whatever it may be. They make a change. I don't want you to have to wait until you aren't being successful to make a change. Yes, it's working. Could we make it better? Let's break it just a little bit and see how we get it to the next level. Final and possibly the most challenging barrier for many people is the failed initiatives of the past. We've tried change, it didn't work. We tried this, it didn't work. We tried technology, it didn't work. We tried analytics, it didn't work. We tried AI, it didn't work. So what? It didn't work. Great. Might still today. What we did, I still remember. I've had people over the course of my career and working with various organizations, we'd be talking about a change they needed to make, and they say, oh, we tried that 7 years ago. It didn't work. Wonderful. That's great news. It doesn't matter. You might have tried it, and it may not have worked then. That doesn't mean it won't work today. Don't let your past dictate your future. Let your past inform your future. It didn't work because of these things. Great. Now when we make the change, I'm going to use those things to make it even better. Overcome the failures of the past to move forward with your change initiatives. Key principle number 5, change occurs at 2 levels, organizationally and individually. All success requires individual commitment. I can't overstate that enough. All change success requires individual commitment. So often we want to talk about this idea that, oh, the organization needs to change, the culture needs to change. It's got to be an organization-wide change before we can do this. I'm not broken, the organization. No. You may need the culture to change. The organization may need to move forward. Don't forget the fact that the only way that any of that happens is that individuals within the organization must change for it to happen. If the individuals don't change, the organization doesn't change, the culture doesn't change, nothing changes. It may be true that the organization needs to experience a change. I get it. You've got to find the individuals that are going to determine the changes, execute the changes, live out the changes. They are going to be the change that the organization needs to see. Who are your change agents? Who's the most influential individuals? Who are the most influential individuals in your organization? Give them action items. They don't have to be the CEO. They don't have to be the C-suite. They can be anybody. And in fact, I would encourage you, find people at every level that are change agents that have influence. Give them action items to drive the change, to be the change that you want to see in your organization. Have them change and then sell the change, because they can say why it's so great. All the great things that came from that change. They can help build the business case for it. They can show personally why it matters. It's not my problem, but the solution makes me better too, so I'm all in. Find those people, put them to work, give them action items. Key principle number 6, I'm terrified of improv. That's not the key principle. I'm just going to tell you, I'm terrified of improv. I won't go to an improv show. They're going to call on me, freaks me out. I love to speak, but I know what I want to say. But I love the idea of yes and from improv. It's got to be one of the best principles when it comes to driving change in an organization. Stop going in and trying to change things, saying this could be better. I think that's broken. We need to go fix it. Instead, I want you to go in with the idea that, yes, this has been successful. Yes, that has gotten us to where we are today. And I believe we can work together to make it even better. You see, when you change it from attacking somebody else's idea or identity or the success of the past to more of a collaborative and we can get better together, it's amazing how many people get on board. This is one of the things that I always encourage young professionals to do. Because for the last several years, probably well over a decade, I've heard leaders and organizations say, our young professionals come in with these ideas and they just want to come in and change everything. You know what? I hope they do. I hope that they do want to come in and make changes, that they have the drive, the passion, the energy, the initiative to come in with new ideas that we don't have and make us better. But I also acknowledge they've got to figure out a way to be tactful about it. And this isn't taught anywhere. So we've got to teach them. Yes, and we have been ridiculously successful. We are growing. We are managing risks. Everything's going the right way. Yes, and we can be even better. And with some changes, it can get better. I don't mean 180-degree changes. 180-degree changes only happen when you're on the brink of extinction. When you're about to fail, when you're about to go under, you've got to change big time. We're not talking big changes. Yes, and with incremental changes. Yes, it's been successful. And if we make this one change, we'll be even more successful. And if we make this other change, we'll be even more successful. And if we make this other change, we'll be even more successful. Acknowledge the success of the past. Acknowledge what the founders built. Acknowledge what the leadership team that's on their way out built. Acknowledge all of the successes of the past. Yes, it's been great. And we can be even better because we can use that as the foundation on which to build the future. Yes, and is one of the best ways to drive change and forward progress in an organization today. Key principle number 7. I promised you that I'd give you a framework. This is it. This is the framework for driving successful positive change in any organization. Step 1, identify the benefits of the change. I know you want to change. That's wonderful. What are we going to get? What's the organization going to see as a benefit? What are the individual stakeholders going to see? The people, the customers, the leadership, the firm, the shareholders, whoever. Identify the benefits of whatever change it is that you're looking to sell. And then identify the barriers. We went through several of those. What barriers are you up against? Don't become defensive on the barriers. Make the business case for the barriers. I understand this is a barrier. Here's how I see that we can overcome that. You don't have to necessarily sell the solution to the barrier at the start of the change. You've got to be ready for the barrier when you face it, that you've got a plan to get over it, get around it, get through it, knock it down, blow it up, whatever. However you want to tackle that barrier. Have a plan for it because you're going to face them. Determine how you're going to measure success. Every good change initiative has measurable outcomes. What's it going to be? Again, the more preventative your changes are, the harder it is to quantify. I get that. Use forecasting, use some hypotheticals to figure out where you're at, where you'd be going on the same path. Look at where you're going to be on the new path. What's going to be that definition of success? And then develop an action plan. Who needs to do what when? So absolutely critical. What are the right things to do? When do they need to be done? Who needs to do them? Step by step, as much as you can. And in that action plan, step 5 of this framework is be so very intentional about your communication. You have got to communicate before the change, during the change, after the change, after the change, after the change. Because you see, so often when we're changing, we get people hyped up. We're going to change. It's going to be amazing. Oh my gosh, look at all the benefits. We kind of keep them hyped up during the change, but then it gets going. It gets hard. I've heard it called the valley of death or the swamp of despair or whatever you want to call it. We get into the middle part of change, which is slow and ugly and not fun and difficult, and everybody's just dreading it. We got to keep communicating. Hey, do you know what? We're in the hardest part of the change right now. We're on the upslope. We are coming out of it. It's going to be great. And then afterwards, celebrate it. Continue to celebrate it. So often we hype them up. We try to keep people hyped, and then we just go radio silent when we're done. We never actually celebrate the fact that we made a change and it was ridiculously successful. And that's exactly what we need. And along the way, throughout all of this plan, build in accountability. How are you going to make sure that you have commitment? How are you going to make sure that people do what they said they were going to do when they said they were going to do it so that you can keep driving this thing forward? That's how you're going to be the most successful. Don't leave it up to hope. Build in accountability at every step of the way. All right, but before I leave you with a couple closing comments, I've got a couple questions that have come in. Being the best is related to management of the internal firms rather than having the best audit. Audit is a rather commoditized service in the market, and a firm doesn't get extra credit for having the best audit. I appreciate that. However, I would argue that audit is currently becoming commoditized. I'm not arguing that. I'm agreeing with you on that. Whoever sent that in, I agree. Audit is becoming commoditized. So how do you build in a differentiator that's going to make it better than everybody else? And by the way, you can't just simply say our audit is better than everybody else. And we have a better audit, therefore you should pay more for our audit. If I'm real candid, I've never met a client that thought, okay, I'm going to pay for a better audit. I've heard a lot of audit firms say it. I've never necessarily heard a client say, oh, you did better. I got more findings this year. Sure. Let me write you a bigger check. I'm so excited to do that. However, what some of the best firms, and this is in response to this question, so I'm more talking to accounting firms now, what some of the best firms do is they say, you know what? We've got an innovative approach to the audit. We're going to do your audit. It's going to be compliant. You're going to get the report. You're going to meet the regulations. We're going to hit the standards. Yeah, all of that, it's a given. But here are the other things that happen as a result of the audit. We're going to identify other opportunities for improvement. We're going to share with you information that we learn that may not be relevant to the audit. It may not be material to the audit, but could help make you a better organization. And before somebody jumps on the independent side, we may not be able to provide the services that make you that better organization. We may not be able to make the decisions for you, but you know what? We're going to differentiate our approach and our experience when you work with us on an audit to where it doesn't feel like a commodity anymore. It's a great Harvard Business Review article on this. Welcome to the Experience Economy. I want to say it was the May-June 98 edition. 98, mind you. So 24 years ago. Welcome to the Experience Economy. Still relatively new for the accounting profession. We want to get out of commodities. I don't want goods. I don't necessarily want services. I want your clients feeling it's an experience to have an audit. Does that sound like a bit of a pipe dream? Maybe it does. Yes, our audits have been successful in the past, and we can make the experience better so that clients value us even more. It may be a compliance-based service, but they're going to see it as so much more than that. I appreciate that question, by the way. Another question, any advice on building this commitment, especially when things don't go to the plan? It can be hard to keep people engaged on the project. Wonderful question, and you're 100% correct. I don't know any change initiative that has ever gone according to plan, start to finish. There's going to be problems along the way. Those that are committed understand up front, it's not going to be a smooth ride. There's going to be bumps, there's going to be dips, there's going to be that swamp of despair, the valley of death, whatever you want to call it. But what's different about leaders that drive change initiatives that are successful is they acknowledge it all along the way. They are willing to say, that's where we're at right now. This is hard. We knew it was going to be hard. We have planned that it's going to be hard. And here's how we're getting it even better. Here's how we're going out of this, how we're overcoming this hurdle, how we're getting through this barrier, how we're making our change. And we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's the big thing. How do you keep people engaged? The same way that you keep people engaged all the time. You communicate with them, you connect with them, you help them see the bigger purpose to what they're doing, to where it's not just tasks on a change order. But the reason that we're making this change is to become a significantly better organization today than we've ever been before. That's why we're making this change. That's the role that you play in this change, and that's why it's so significant. So we communicate. That's what we do throughout all of this. If you're still not sure that you can drive change, let me leave you with one final thought. And this is a thought from an author, a podcast host, and a CEO of a company that I just hugely admire. Jake Thompson is his name. I loved this quote. He said, "Imperfect action stops incessant overthinking." So often when it comes to us making a change, we overthink it. We can come up with all the scenarios as to why we don't change. What he would advocate and what I would advocate is this: figure out why, make a small change, take a small step. When you take action, you start to move forward. Action will create clarity, and that's going to help you be even more successful in your change initiatives. If you have follow-up questions that you'd like me to answer, you can email me, jeremyc@upstreamacademy.com. I'd like to thank the team at MindBridge, Danielle, all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this event, in this conference, and present to your users. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.